Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unpack the story of a 7th century leader whose ideas on justice were so incredibly powerful, they inspired a 20th century Christian author to write his entire biography.
Wow, I mean, that is a powerful, uncompromising vow of absolute justice made over 1,000 years ago. It's basically a promise to drag power kicking and screaming to the truth, no matter the cost. So, who was the man behind these incredible words? And why on earth would a 20th century Christian author call him the voice of human justice? Well, let's get into it. We're going to be diving into the book The Voice of Human Justice by the Lebanese writer George Jordac and the figure at its center, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib.
And let's start with the author himself. You see, Jordac's perspective as a Christian looking back at a foundational figure in Islam is exactly what makes this whole account so fascinating. He's not just writing history here, he's really digging into this universal ideal of justice. And the book paints a pretty grim picture of the world we're stepping into. We're talking about 7th century Arabia, a place Jordac describes as so harsh that a coin was worth more than a person's life. This wasn't a society of deep thinkers and philosophers. This was a world of brutal tribal warfare, constant violence, and just deep inequality, where doing the right thing, well, it was a luxury most couldn't afford. And it's right in the middle of this brutal landscape that Jordac introduces our main figure. But he's not someone forged by the desert's cruelty. No, he was shaped by a totally unique upbringing, right under the wing of his cousin, the Prophet Muhammad. And what's so cool is how Jordan lets Ali speak for himself here. This quote, it shows this isn't just about being family. It's about a direct, daily transfer of knowledge and ethics. Ali is basically presented as the Prophet's star pupil, soaking everything up. Now this moment at Ghadir al-Khoei is a huge deal in the book. For Jordac, the author, this isn't some vague, symbolic gesture. He presents this public declaration, made right there during the Prophet's final pilgrimage, as a totally clear and direct appointment, basically setting the stage for Ali's future as a leader. Okay, so that's the setup. Now let's get to the real heart of the book. How did that unique upbringing translate into how he actually governed? Because you'll see, his code of conduct was, well, it was revolutionary, and it was going to make him some seriously powerful enemies.
And that brings us to his #1 rule, his first core principle, absolute equality when it came to the public treasury. Now you got to remember, in that era, leaders used money to reward their buddies and punish their enemies. But Ali, he saw it completely differently. For him, the treasury wasn't a personal piggy bank, it was a sacred trust that belonged to every single person equally.
And get this next story just shows you how deeply he believed it and the personal cost. When his own brother, Akil, comes asking for a little advance from the treasury, Ali flat out refuses. He says he can't betray the trust of everyone just for one person. And what happens? Akil gets angry and leaves to join Ali's biggest rival. I mean, that's integrity. Jordac presents this as a moment that completely defined him.
So the book really draws a line in the sand here. On one side, you've got Ali's radical idea of equality for all. And on the other, you have the way things were usually done. Giving public money to your relatives, using the treasury to buy loyalty, the system of patronage he was trying to tear down.
And his personal life. It was a mirror of his public policy. He wasn't one of those do as I say, not as I do leaders. He'd mend his own shoes, grind his own grain. Jordac says he never even ate his fill because he was always worried that someone, somewhere else, might be hungry. He lived in a simple hut that was also his government office. He famously asked, what kind of leader would I be if I didn't share in the hardships of my people? For him, leadership meant living right there alongside the most vulnerable.
Okay, this next story is absolutely central to the book's argument. So, Ali, the ruler of this vast empire, sees a Christian citizen with a coat of mail that he thinks is his. What does he do? He takes the man to court, before a judge he himself appointed. Ali makes his case, but the judge asks for witnesses. Ali doesn't have any. And so he just smiles and accepts the ruling against him. The Christian gets to keep the armor. Can you imagine? The guy is so stunned by this level of justice from the most powerful man in the land that he returns the armor, admits it was Ali's all along, and converts on the spot. The message here is crystal clear. In Ali's world, justice wasn't about who you were, how much power you had, or what faith you followed. It was about evidence, period.
Okay, so it's probably no surprise that a leader this uncompromising was going to make some big-time enemies. And that brings us to the ultimate clash of ideals, a conflict embodied by his main rival, a man named Muawiyah.
And Jordac, the author, frames this as way more than just a political power struggle. This was a war between two totally opposite visions for what society should be. Is the whole point of government to serve justice and humanity? Or is it just a tool to get and keep personal power? Are people fundamentally equal, or are they just pawns to be managed? These are the questions at the heart of their conflict. And you really see this clash of philosophies play out in the most dramatic way possible, on the battlefield. During the Battle of Siffin, Muawiyah's army pulls off a brilliant strategic move. They seize control of the only source of water, the Euphrates River.
Their plan was as simple as it was brutal: win the war by making the other side die of thirst. They literally told Ali's army, "You're not getting a single drop of water until you're dead."
But Ali's army didn't just give up. They launched this desperate all-or-nothing counterattack, and incredibly, it worked. They drove Muawiyah's forces away from the riverbank and got complete control of the water.
Okay, so here it is. This is the moment of truth that reveals everything about his character. The tables have completely turned. He has his enemies right where he wants them. Their lives are in his hands. So what does he do?
He invited Muawiyah's army, the very same army that just tried to kill his men with thirst, to come and share the water equally. He just refused to stoop to their level. Instead of getting revenge, he offered them basic human decency, an act of chivalry. And Jordac presents this as this moment of incredible moral strength, an act of mercy that showed the world the fundamental difference between these two men.
And it's this unwavering commitment to a higher moral code that really defined everything for him: his rule, his battles, and in the end, his death at the hands of an assassin.
And I mean, just think about this. After he's been fatally wounded, what are his instructions to his sons? It's not go get revenge. It's the two principles that guided his entire life. Always be an enemy to the oppressor and a supporter of the oppressed. And then he says, if you forgive my murderer, it will be closer to piety. Wow. Just wow. The capacity for mercy, even for the man who killed him.
And that's really the big question that George Jordac's book leaves us with, isn't it? In a world that is still struggling with so much inequality and injustice, what is the value of a voice from centuries ago? A voice that declared that the only reason the poor go hungry is because the rich have hoarded their share. The book suggests that this voice, this powerful call for absolute justice, for the rights of the oppressed, and for holding power accountable, it's not some dusty relic of history. It's a timeless challenge that's speaking directly to us right here, right now.